Hello, it is June 2019, and this is, I think, number 6 in my ALS journey. I am still walking and talking, still eating and breathing, but I do notice quick fatigue in my legs and fatigue in my speech if I talk too much, so you may notice at the end. Okay, first of all, ALS is tough to diagnose and treat, as I have said before. And when something is that difficult, people feel hopeless, and that's a natural human state because human beings tend to hope. And when there is no place to put our hope, we look for other things to fill that void. There are always plenty of people around ready to take your money, and lots of nonsense around for such things. And I would like to talk about 5 things that are basically confusing a lot of ALS sufferers, and I think it's a cruel thing to do. Not all of these are nonsense. Some of them are just under-researched, or they've been broadly publicized, but they're still just conjecture, and I'll point some of those things out. First off, Lyme disease. There's a fellow on Twitter who insists that all ALS is undiagnosed Lyme disease. One thing is you want to always look out for people who use all or every. And secondly, his firm belief is that the best way to treat ALS is with long-term massive doses of antibiotics, which is basically how they treat Lyme disease. Another bit of nonsense out there is this idea that overuse of antibiotics and anesthetics is actually the cause of ALS. And this, like I said, is not necessarily nonsense, but it is kind of under-researched and over-reported. And also it runs contrary to that first person who insists that the best treatment for ALS is massive doses of antibiotics. A good example of how things can get very, very confusing. And number 3, there are lots of discussions about gluten sensitivity and allergy. And because some of those symptoms look very much like ALS, a lot of people have pinned gluten sensitivity as a cause of ALS. There's very, very little research to support this. But like I said, that information is out there. I wouldn't stop eating bread just because of this. Number 4 is the effects of aluminum. And we use aluminum in a lot of products, and fast food wraps things in aluminum, and we drink beverages from aluminum. And so when we see people with ALS and we say, have you used a lot of soft drinks? Maybe that's it. Well, it might be a false connection because a lot of people use aluminum who don't have ALS, and a lot of people who have ALS don't use a lot of aluminum. There also are some people who like to point at the fact that veterans are 2 times more likely to get ALS. But from a scientific standpoint, there are far too many variables. For example, I have a brother who died of ALS. He was in the Navy in the South Pacific during Vietnam. Another brother who does not have ALS was an airborne paramedic in the 82nd Airborne. I was a 2x4 in field artillery, 2 years active, 4 years in the Army Reserve. I do have ALS, and both my aunt and my mother were never in the service, and they both died of ALS. So I don't really think that's a valid connection because there are just far too many variables that just can't be accounted for. Now, one thing worth considering is this idea of antioxidants. Both radicava and riluzole have the effect of neutralizing the neurotoxicity of free radicals. Now, what that really means is if you have a diet that increases the free radicals in your body, it can attack your nerves and poison them, okay? And so a lot of people are looking at this as, because xylitol can lengthen a person's life, what they're thinking is, what if we eat a lot of foods that are high in antioxidants? Well, it won't cost you anything to do that. It's good nutrition, and if it does you some good, more power to you. If it doesn't, it's still good nutrition. Two things that you might also consider if it's legal for you: A, caffeine, which is legal everywhere, also good antioxidants. CBD, which is legal everywhere, drink it as tea. It's a good antioxidant, and also weed, which I don't recommend. And finally, another thing you can do for yourself, which may actually slow the progression, is to be careful about how much physical exercise you do. A lot of people that I've talked to who have ALS, when they felt the first onset before they were really diagnosed, they operated under the normal assumption: if you work a muscle really, really work it, it gets stronger as you work it. But in ALS, the more you work it, the faster it degrades. So if you know you have ALS, it's best to be, and I have checked this with medical professionals, moderate exercise is good. Extreme exercise is bad. No exercise is bad. So moderate exercise, you don't want to overuse those muscles because they will degrade faster, but you don't want to not use them because the same thing will happen. They will atrophy if they're not used. So very, very minor. You're not going for hikes. You're not going for long walks. You're not lifting weights. But normal daily activities are, will be a moderate amount of exercise. Shouldn't overdo your muscles. Now, if you have one of those versions of ALS where you're 2 years from diagnosis to cemetery, it's kind of hard to make those kinds of adaptations. God bless you, do what you can. But for those of us with very slow progression, and I've talked to many people who have a relative, for example, one person this morning told me her grandmother had it for 8 years. So if you have a slow progression, there are things you can do to be more comfortable, and things that will not speed up the progression. Less is more in the case of ALS. So I'll see you again in July. Incidentally, I have had a genetic test, knowing that both my aunt, my mother, and a brother had ALS. It should not be a surprise that my ALS is familial, inherited through the family. The gene test does verify that the cause of my ALS is genetic. Anyway, see you in July after my second ALS clinic.